April 1945. The sun beats down on a U.S.-controlled POW camp in the Pacific. Dust rising from cracked earth and barracks, lined in neat, harsh rows. Japanese soldiers, thin and weary from months of battle and scarcity, move silently through the camp, their eyes wary, muscles tense from years of discipline and survival. Hunger gnaws quietly, but the rules are strict, and suspicion of Americans runs deep. Then, an unexpected ritual begins. Each day, the guards place baskets of fresh fruit at the edge of the barracks. Bananas, oranges, apples, vivid in color, cool against the tropical heat. The soldiers stare, stunned, uncertain. In their experience, such generosity is foreign, almost incomprehensible. Fingers brush the fruit hesitantly, eyes scanning for hidden danger, hearts pounding with disbelief. This simple act, repeated day after day, becomes more than nourishment. It is a quiet rebellion against fear, a small testament to human kindness amid the chaos of war. Each piece of fruit is a reminder that compassion can exist even between enemies, that the smallest gestures may carry the greatest weight. By early 1945, the Pacific War had reached its final brutal stages. The Allied forces had advanced through the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and were closing in on Okinawa. Japanese soldiers, hardened by years of combat, were increasingly isolated and exhausted. Many had survived battles with minimal supplies, enduring hunger, tropical disease, and relentless heat. Those captured by the Americans faced a stark contrast: strict but organized camps, basic medical care, and, surprisingly, a level of humane treatment unfamiliar to most. Japanese POWs carried a unique psychological burden. Imperial indoctrination emphasized honor, duty, and the shame of surrender. Being captured was not just a personal defeat, it was a cultural and moral humiliation. The stigma of captivity weighed heavily on these men, compounding physical deprivation with deep emotional stress. Many were wary of their captors, expecting harsh treatment, violence, or deprivation as a consequence of failure in the field. Malnutrition and disease were common, with prior diets based on minimal rations leaving them weak and susceptible to infection. In the American camps, rules and routines were strict, yet designed to balance discipline with care. Roll calls, work details, and barracks inspections punctuated the day, but the provision of food, shelter, and medical attention adhered to the 1929 Geneva Convention. Fresh fruit, in particular, was introduced not only as a nutritional supplement, but as a calculated effort to restore health, reduce disease, and maintain morale. These soldiers, accustomed to scarcity and harshness, were initially bewildered by the sight of bananas, oranges, and apples laid out for them, untouched by expectation or obligation. The daily fruit deliveries were emblematic of a larger approach, understanding that physical care could influence mental stability. Officers observed the prisoners' health, noting that vitamin deficiencies and weakened immunity left many vulnerable to illness. Introducing fruit was both practical and humane. Beyond nutrition, it offered a rare sense of choice, pleasure, and human connection. For soldiers steeped in a culture that equated surrender with dishonor, this unexpected act challenged assumptions about their captors, slowly reshaping their perceptions. Life in the camp followed a rigid routine. Labor assignments, medical checkups, and chores filled the day, leaving few opportunities for leisure. Letters from home were sparse, censored, and delayed, reinforcing feelings of isolation. In this context, the simple act of receiving fruit became extraordinary. It was tangible, immediate, and repetitive, offering structure and reassurance. Soldiers began to anticipate the daily deliveries, observing patterns, timing, and consistency. Trust, hesitant at first, slowly formed around this ritual, reshaping the environment and interpersonal dynamics. By understanding the context, the war's closing chaos, the physical and psychological hardships of Japanese POWs, and the carefully considered policies of the American Guards, we see how a seemingly small gesture could carry immense weight. Fresh fruit was not merely food, it was a lifeline, a bridge between enemies, and an introduction to the possibility of humane treatment. The stage was set for the transformative impact this daily ritual would have, revealing the resilience of the human spirit even in captivity. The treatment of Japanese prisoners by the Americans was shaped by a combination of international law, strategic considerations, and cultural awareness. Under the 1929 Geneva Convention, POWs were entitled to humane treatment, sufficient food, medical care, and shelter. Unlike previous theaters of the war, where Japanese soldiers had often faced harsh conditions in Allied captivity, U.S. policy emphasized both legality and morality. Officers were trained to manage prisoners with discipline tempered by empathy. Recognizing that humane treatment could foster compliance, reduce tension, and create lasting impressions, nutrition played a central role in this approach. Japanese soldiers, having endured years of restricted diets and shortages, were particularly vulnerable to malnutrition and disease. Rations in the American camps included fresh vegetables and proteins, but the introduction of fruit was both symbolic and practical. Bananas, oranges, and apples provided essential vitamins, helping prevent scurvy and boost overall health. Beyond their physical benefits, fruit carried a psychological dimension. Bright, fresh, and fragrant, it represented abundance in a context defined by scarcity. For men trained to expect deprivation from their captors, these daily offerings were startling and, at first, almost unbelievable. Cultural considerations amplified the effect. In Japanese society, surrender was associated with shame, and captured soldiers were often deeply distrustful of authority figures. Allowing prisoners to select and enjoy fruit without coercion challenged these assumptions. Each piece of fruit was a small act of trust, communicated silently. "We respect your humanity, even in captivity." Soldiers initially approached the baskets with suspicion, hesitant to accept what they perceived as an unearned kindness. Over time, the ritual's consistency and the absence of hidden conditions reassured them, demonstrating a form of ethical leadership that transcended military protocol. The daily fruit also created subtle social dynamics within the camp. Prisoners began to share portions with fellow captives, teach one another preferences, and even play small games around the distribution. These interactions, though minor, fostered camaraderie and mutual support. Officers noted that morale visibly improved. Men were more cooperative, less tense, and more engaged in camp routines. The simple act of providing fruit became a tool for maintaining order and promoting psychological well-being, illustrating how humanitarian practices could align with practical objectives. Moreover, the practice had broader symbolic implications. In a war defined by brutality, the simple generosity of fresh fruit stood out as an act of human decency. It demonstrated that even in conflict, ethical choices were possible, and that small gestures could carry disproportionate emotional weight. For Japanese prisoners, each orange or banana was a reminder that the captors were not enemies defined solely by violence. They were human beings capable of empathy. The repetition of this act reinforced trust, gradually reshaping prisoners' expectations of treatment, and subtly influencing their behavior and morale. By combining nutrition, cultural sensitivity, and psychological strategy, the Americans transformed a basic necessity into a meaningful ritual. The stage was now fully set for the angles of this story to emerge: human reactions, leadership decisions, tactical outcomes, and moral implications, all centered on the simple, daily act of giving fresh fruit. For the Japanese soldiers, the daily arrival of fresh fruit was a profound emotional experience. Accustomed to scarcity and trained to expect hostility from their captors, the simple act of receiving bananas, oranges, or apples elicited surprise, disbelief, and eventually gratitude. Many soldiers approached the baskets cautiously at first, wary of hidden traps or strings attached. Over time, however, hesitation gave way to acceptance, and the fruit became more than sustenance. It was a reminder of life outside the barbed wire. Soldiers who had been isolated or demoralized began to regain energy, both physically and mentally, as small gestures of care reminded them of their own humanity. The American officers overseeing the camps understood the strategic and moral value of these routines. Providing fruit was not a random act of kindness, but a deliberate choice grounded in both policy and foresight. Officers recognized that healthy, contented prisoners were easier to manage, less prone to illness, and less likely to rebel or resist. At the same time, the act conveyed a moral message. Even in wartime, ethical treatment of captives was possible. Leadership decisions extended beyond discipline and regulation. They included calculated gestures that reinforced trust, respect, and psychological stability among prisoners. From a practical standpoint, fresh fruit played a critical role in maintaining camp efficiency and health. Nutritional supplementation prevented disease, improved physical stamina, and reduced medical complications, which in turn reduced the logistical burden on camp resources. Soldiers who received adequate nutrition were more cooperative, focused during work details, and less likely to provoke disciplinary issues. The presence of fruit was a simple yet effective tool in the broader strategy of camp management, demonstrating how humanitarian actions could simultaneously serve operational needs. The psychological effect of receiving fruit daily was profound. It became a ritual that prisoners could anticipate, providing a sense of stability in an otherwise unpredictable environment. Moments spent peeling an orange or savoring a banana allowed soldiers to experience a fleeting reprieve from fear, hunger, and uncertainty. The fruit also encouraged small social interactions, as prisoners compared flavors, shared portions, and even joked quietly among themselves. These emotional and social benefits reinforced morale, fostering resilience in the face of confinement and cultural shame associated with surrender. The ethical dimension of the daily fruit deliveries cannot be overstated. By providing prisoners with food that was not strictly necessary for compliance, the American officers affirmed the inherent dignity of those in their care. In contrast to the harsh treatment that many Japanese soldiers had witnessed or expected in other theaters of the war, this act demonstrated that humanity could coexist with military authority. The ritual of giving fruit daily reinforced ethical leadership, creating a moral precedent that shaped the prisoners' experience and their perception of their captors. For Japanese soldiers, the surprise of receiving fruit daily was amplified by cultural expectations. In Japan, surrender was associated with dishonor, and captives were often treated harshly. The generosity displayed by American guards challenged deeply ingrained beliefs about the enemy and the consequences of defeat. Beyond sustenance, the fruit represented respect and consideration, subtly communicating that captives were still recognized as human beings worthy of care. The act of receiving fruit became a bridge between cultural worlds, humanizing captors in the eyes of prisoners and creating a space where trust could begin to form. The daily fruit deliveries had a subtle but powerful psychological impact on Japanese prisoners. Long conditioned to fear, scarcity, and the stigma of surrender, they were initially skeptical, questioning the motives behind such generosity. Yet repetition and consistency gradually built trust, allowing prisoners to experience relief, comfort, and a rare sense of security. The ritual created mental anchors in an otherwise unstable environment, giving soldiers something predictable and positive to anticipate. Psychologists today would recognize this as a form of reinforcement. Small, repeated acts of kindness can stabilize emotional states, reduce stress, and encourage cooperative behavior. For the prisoners, the fruit became more than nutrition. It became a quiet source of psychological resilience. The act of sharing and enjoying fruit also fostered social cohesion within the camp. Soldiers began comparing tastes, offering portions to one another, and even creating informal group rituals around distribution. These interactions, though minor, reinforced camaraderie in a setting otherwise marked by hierarchy, cultural shame, and isolation. Through a simple act of nourishment, prisoners found themselves connected in ways that encouraged mutual support, communication, and a sense of shared experience. The fruit became a medium through which social bonds could be rebuilt, even temporarily, amidst the constraints of captivity. For the Japanese soldiers, the act challenged preconceived notions of the American enemy. In their experience, captors were harsh, unforgiving, and sometimes cruel. Receiving food voluntarily, without coercion or obligation, was nearly incomprehensible. This daily ritual forced a cognitive reassessment. If captors could show care, perhaps captivity did not entail cruelty. The fruit became a subtle but effective tool for humanizing the enemy, fostering a tentative bridge of understanding. It reshaped expectations and helped prisoners perceive Americans as disciplined yet ethical, capable of empathy even in wartime. The daily fruit deliveries also underscore a broader moral lesson about leadership and the ethics of war. By choosing to provide nourishment beyond the bare minimum required by law, American officers affirmed that ethical considerations could coexist with military objectives. This act reinforced principles of respect, dignity, and humanitarian responsibility, illustrating that small gestures could carry profound significance. Prisoners were given not only food, but acknowledgement of their humanity, and this gesture left a lasting imprint on their perception of both the captors and the war itself. The impact of these fruit deliveries persisted well beyond the immediate experience. Prisoners often recalled them decades later as defining moments of their captivity. Diaries and interviews describe the ritual not simply as a provision of food, but as a symbol of hope, reliability, and trust in the midst of chaos. Guards and officers also remembered the transformation. Prisoners became calmer, healthier, and more cooperative, demonstrating that humanitarian acts can produce tangible benefits in management, morale, and post-war relations. The fruit became emblematic of a philosophy that valued human dignity even in extreme circumstances. Finally, the fruit deliveries exemplify the power of cultural reconciliation. By respecting prisoners' basic needs and providing a gesture that was both practical and symbolic, American officers bridged a cultural divide. Japanese soldiers, initially incredulous, gradually accepted that captors could demonstrate care, reshaping attitudes toward the enemy and opening space for empathy and understanding. This small act, repeated daily, laid the groundwork for psychological and cultural healing long after the war had ended. It was early May 1945. The tropical sun scorched the camp grounds, the humidity thick and suffocating, and yet the soldiers lined up each morning with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The baskets arrived punctually: bananas, oranges, and apples, their colors vivid against the dust-streaked barracks. For the Japanese prisoners, the sight was almost surreal. Many hesitated, glancing around to see if any hidden threat accompanied the gift. Years of indoctrination and battlefield hardship had taught them to distrust generosity. Yet, each day, the fruit was there, untouched, unaccompanied by orders or conditions. The first few mornings, soldiers touched the fruit lightly, reluctant to take more than one piece. Some laughed nervously, unsure whether it was a test. Others stared in disbelief, recalling the harsh rations of their recent past. Slowly, fingers became bolder, peeling bananas, slicing oranges, and tasting apples with cautious appreciation. The simple act of eating fresh fruit, once so ordinary in civilian life, became an emotional and sensory revelation. The sweetness, the texture, the aroma, every detail contrasted sharply with the monotony and deprivation of the preceding months. Officers observed quietly, noting the subtle but unmistakable shift in behavior. Soldiers who had been withdrawn began talking softly, comparing the fruit and sharing small gestures of kindness with one another. Those who had been resistant to interaction now participated, discussing flavors, or joking quietly about their preferences. The fruit ritual transformed the barracks from a space of tension and isolation into one of cautious engagement and shared humanity. Individual reactions were striking. One young soldier, thin and gaunt from previous battles, hesitated with a banana, then broke into a tentative smile as he tasted it. An older prisoner, recalling childhood meals, quietly whispered to his neighbor, savoring both the fruit and the rare emotional reprieve. These moments, small as they seemed, represented the culmination of weeks of consistent kindness. The soldiers were not only nourished physically, but emotionally, experiencing fleeting relief from fear, shame, and isolation. The repeated act also reinforced trust. By maintaining punctuality and consistency in distribution, officers demonstrated reliability and respect, essential in a population trained to expect deceit. The prisoners began to anticipate the ritual, integrating it into their day and finding comfort in its predictability. Morale improved visibly. Guards reported calmer behavior, increased cooperation, and fewer disciplinary incidents. The fruit, simple in form, wielded extraordinary power in shaping human behavior under extreme conditions. As the days turned into weeks, the barracks transformed into a space where small pleasures were possible even amid captivity. Soldiers shared fruit, compared tastes, and discussed memories associated with each piece, fostering social bonds that had been suppressed under the strain of war and cultural shame. The ritual became a psychological anchor, a rare instance of stability in an otherwise unpredictable environment. By mid-May 1945, the daily fruit deliveries had become a central rhythm of camp life. Soldiers no longer approached the baskets with hesitation, but with a quiet anticipation. The simple act of receiving food, previously unremarkable in civilian life, had evolved into a ritual of psychological and social significance. Officers observed that prisoners who participated were calmer, healthier, and more cooperative, while those who had once been withdrawn now engaged in conversation and shared small gestures of kindness. The emotional resonance of the ritual was profound. Many prisoners described feelings of disbelief, relief, and even gratitude. A thin, exhausted soldier smiled for the first time in weeks as he peeled a banana. An older man savored an orange, quietly recalling family meals long ago. These moments, repeated day after day, reinforced a sense of agency and humanity. The prisoners were reminded that, despite captivity and war, they were still recognized as individuals with needs, preferences, and dignity. The social impact was equally significant. Soldiers began to share fruit with their peers, compare flavors, and teach one another small rituals around eating and enjoying the food. These interactions fostered camaraderie in a setting otherwise defined by isolation, hierarchy, and cultural shame. The fruit became a medium for rebuilding social bonds, offering a rare outlet for collaboration and connection. Officers noted the decrease in tension during work details, the smoother execution of routines, and a newfound willingness to engage positively with both captors and fellow prisoners. Cultural and psychological boundaries softened. The Japanese soldiers, initially skeptical of American intentions, gradually recognized acts of consistent care as genuine. The ritual challenged assumptions that enemies could only act with hostility. By demonstrating reliability and generosity, the American officers created an environment in which trust, however tentative, could take root. For prisoners accustomed to fear and deprivation, this recognition was transformative. The fruit was no longer just food. It was a symbol of humane treatment, a reminder that ethical behavior was possible even in wartime. The physical benefits reinforced the psychological ones. Access to fresh fruit improved health, prevented disease, and restored energy, making soldiers less susceptible to illness and more able to participate in daily routines. This practical aspect complemented the emotional impact. Healthy bodies reinforced resilience, while emotional uplift strengthened morale. The combination of nutrition, ritual, and trust created a feedback loop, gradually reshaping the prisoners' experience of captivity. By late May, the cumulative effect of this simple act became undeniable. Soldiers were more engaged, healthier, and calmer. Social bonds strengthened, psychological stress lessened, and trust toward their captors grew. The fruit had become a catalyst for transformation, illustrating the power of consistent, humane action in reshaping the human experience of war. In the weeks following the establishment of daily fruit deliveries, the immediate effects on the camp were clear and measurable. Prisoners' behavior shifted noticeably. Those who had been withdrawn or tense became more engaged in daily routines, showing signs of improved morale and cooperation. Guards reported that minor conflicts between prisoners decreased, and overall compliance with camp regulations improved. What began as a simple act of nourishment had evolved into a tool for stabilizing the psychological and social environment of the camp. American officers documented these observations meticulously. Reports highlighted both physical and behavioral improvements among the prisoners. Health markers, such as energy levels, susceptibility to illness, and weight stability, showed measurable gains, attributed largely to the inclusion of fresh fruit in rations. Morale assessments, while subjective, indicated a reduction in stress and anxiety, alongside an increased willingness to follow routines and participate in communal activities. These effects confirmed the dual value of the fruit. It was both humanitarian and practical, a simple intervention that improved camp management while fostering well-being. Personal accounts from prisoners revealed the depth of the fruit's emotional impact. One soldier recalled, "The bananas were like a spark of life. I hadn't felt a sense of normalcy in months. For a moment, I was just a man eating fruit, not a prisoner." Another wrote in a diary, "It was astonishing. Every morning I saw the baskets, and I couldn't believe this was real. No orders, no strings, just fruit. It made the days bearable." These reflections underscore the psychological significance of the practice. It provided comfort, routine, and a tangible connection to humanity amid the strict confines of captivity. The social effects were equally notable. Soldiers began to share fruit with one another, fostering camaraderie and mutual support. Comparisons of taste, casual conversations, and playful exchanges around the fruit became regular features of camp life. Officers noted that these small social interactions reduced tension and promoted cohesion, strengthening a sense of community among prisoners who had previously been isolated or competitive. The ritual of sharing fruit encouraged empathy, cooperation, and informal leadership within the prisoner ranks. The provision of fruit also had an unintended symbolic effect. In a conflict often defined by cruelty and deprivation, the act represented ethical leadership and humane treatment. Prisoners, initially skeptical, gradually understood that the generosity was genuine. This reshaped perceptions of the captors, creating trust and a more nuanced understanding of the enemy. The daily ritual became a marker of reliability and consistency, reinforcing a sense of security and stability within an environment that had previously been unpredictable and harsh. The effects of the daily fruit deliveries extended far beyond the immediate health and morale improvements in the camp. For many Japanese prisoners, the memory of this simple act endured long after liberation and repatriation. Former prisoners frequently recalled the fruit ritual decades later, describing it as a defining moment of their captivity. In memoirs and interviews, the daily fruit became symbolic, not just of sustenance, but of dignity, trust, and unexpected kindness amid the harsh realities of war. One veteran reflected, "It was more than fruit. It was proof that even in war, humans could care for one another." The influence of the practice also shaped perceptions of American POW policy. Officers' deliberate decision to provide fruit demonstrated a commitment to ethical treatment and adherence to international standards, contrasting sharply with some other theaters of the war where POWs suffered extreme deprivation. The daily fruit deliveries exemplified how humane practices could improve both morale and discipline, fostering an environment where captives were healthier, calmer, and more cooperative. Historians later cited such programs as examples of how small gestures could have profound practical and moral consequences in wartime. Beyond the camp itself, the fruit deliveries highlighted broader lessons about culture and human psychology. Japanese soldiers, steeped in a culture that equated surrender with shame, were challenged to rethink assumptions about the enemy. The act of giving food without coercion communicated respect and human recognition. Repeated exposure to consistent kindness began to break down psychological barriers, fostering empathy, trust, and a more nuanced understanding of captors. These lessons remained with prisoners long after the war, influencing how they reflected on captivity, leadership, and the nature of humanity in conflict. The long-term emotional impact was equally significant. Soldiers recalled the daily ritual as a moment of relief, a reminder of home, and a brief escape from the pressures and shame of imprisonment. Diaries and oral histories often emphasize the emotional resonance. Prisoners remembered the colors, textures, and taste of the fruit, and the small shared interactions that accompanied it. These memories reinforced resilience and provided a psychological anchor during one of the most stressful periods of their lives. The broader historical significance lies in the illustration of how seemingly minor acts can carry lasting weight. The fruit was a tangible representation of ethical leadership, cultural awareness, and strategic care. It demonstrates that even during total war, human decency can be exercised in small but impactful ways. Soldiers who experienced this act of kindness often cited it as one of the few moments of relief and trust in captivity, highlighting the importance of humane treatment in shaping the lived experience of prisoners. In a sun-drenched POW camp of 1945, a basket of fruit became more than sustenance. It became a quiet testament to humanity. Bananas, oranges, and apples, delivered day after day, nourished bodies, lifted spirits, and offered a rare moment of comfort in a world defined by war, scarcity, and fear. For the Japanese prisoners, accustomed to deprivation and bound by cultural codes that equated surrender with shame, these simple gifts were transformative. They challenged assumptions, built trust, and reminded men of their own dignity. The daily ritual demonstrates that the human experience of war is not measured solely in battles, strategy, or casualties. It is also shaped by small, deliberate acts that restore hope and affirm life. Nutrition, kindness, and consistency became a bridge between captor and captive, between fear and reassurance. Through these modest gestures, soldiers regained agency over their own emotions, found moments of connection with peers, and glimpsed the possibility of ethical conduct even amid conflict. American officers understood the dual power of these acts, practical and moral. Fresh fruit maintained health, reduced tension, and encouraged cooperation, but it also conveyed respect, empathy, and ethical leadership. History often emphasizes grand strategies and decisive engagements, yet the daily fruit deliveries remind us that small, thoughtful actions can resonate far beyond their immediate context. They leave impressions that outlast wars, shaping memories, narratives, and understanding for decades to come. Decades later, former prisoners recalled the taste, the color, the ritual itself, and the profound emotional impact it carried. It became a symbol of resilience, human connection, and the enduring power of care. In a time of destruction, the daily act of giving fruit demonstrates that even in war, humanity can persist.